So hi everybody. We appreciate you joining. We are YourStudio, a strategy and experience design agency. We're based in London, Amsterdam, and Melbourne. And my name is Danny Newman. I'm the director of our Amsterdam studio, and I'm joined by our co-founder and CEO, Tom Phillipson.
Hello.
And our other co-founder and executive creative director, Howard Sullivan. So today we're excited to be talking to you about future formats and the role of the store. So we'll be sharing a short presentation, but we will be asking you questions in the form of a poll and encouraging conversation along the way and at the end as well. So that's the housekeeping done. I'll hand you over to Howard.
Thank you very much. So lovely to see everyone here. We're going to keep it breezy and bouncy and hopefully get a session, something where we can all co-create and think about some ideas together. We've got a loose framework we're going to talk through, and just before we get going on that, actually what's interesting is a year ago, almost to the day, we presented at PSFK's main stage in New York, and we were talking about the future of retail and the promise of a new decade. And one of the things that I did was moderate a panel on multi-sensory design, which there's so much irony in that we were all about a month or two later actually locked down without the ability to touch or feel anything. We'd all been to a slime installation in New York City together, touching and getting all like really, really messy together. So it was quite an interesting and challenging year. So the first thing we'd like to ask at this point, we've got, if you look on the right-hand side, you can see the three toggles, which are chat, polls, and people. If you click onto polls, there are a couple that we thought would be good fun to get the session rolling with. And then Tom's got the powers of persuasion to see whether you might change any of your answers in the next slides he's going to introduce. But you can see the first thing is the physical store still going to play a vital role as we head towards 2025. A line in the sand, just thinking of allegedly a much more post-pandemic time. If your answer is yes, there are a few options there that you can put down about the role that you think the future store will play. So we've got three sections today. We're each going to do one, and I'm going to hand over to Tom to do the intro.
Thanks, chaps. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today as well. It's good to see so far the vote, and I wouldn't expect anything else if you come to a talk on recalibrating the physical retail space. That we've got 100% of people think the physical store is still going to play a part in the next few years. So that's a good sign. Don't need to persuade anyone on this call. Yeah, so just as a quick intro into us, we, as the guy said, we want to really try and make it as two-way as possible. So any questions you have, fire them away, and at the end of each section, we'll whether it's invite you up if you want, or we can just answer the question and have a bit of a debate. So as a business, YourStudio, we've been going 12 or so years now, and we're based in London, Amsterdam, and Melbourne. And we do a lot of work in the US with clients from Nike, L'Oreal to Mars. So a really broad spectrum of sectors we work within. But very much as a business, we're all about consumer engagement, and whether that's echoed in a strategy or whether that's echoed in a pop-up experience or a retail store, the consumer engagement element of it is the most important part. Our purpose as a business is to inspire human connection, which is obviously, over the last 12 months, we've been actively encouraged not to, inspire any human connection with each other. We're doing the exact opposite. So it's been a challenging time to think about, okay, how do we, keep creating that connection with, our clients that we work with, our partners we work with, but also the consumers, how do we sort of stay with or ahead of the consumers of what they're thinking. So that's just a little intro into us. And then if you flick on to the next page. So, we've got a really broad spectrum of work that we work across, from pop-ups to strategy to, if you see the top left, that's a new store design we did for Fido across China. In the center, we've got a Razor, which is, when we talk about formats, that's a community store that we created. It was all around gamers and all around, esports. How do you create the best possible? I think someone's joined our moderator panel there. How do we, create this sort of clubhouse for gamers in London? So, formats are a really important part of what we do. And then, what we're really famous for is one of the projects on the top right, which was sort of part of a bigger strategy, was the Topshop water slide, which, was a real game changer. It's quite a number of years now, but, how do you activate the store experience? Not only how do you develop formats, but how do you really activate it? So if you go to the next slide. So this leads us on to future formats. So, I know Trisha, I think Carrie may have seen this also as well, who's come to join us, but we really wanted to make this a two-way conversation as well. We presented this just before Christmas with PSFK and some of our partners. Formats can do various different roles. They can really, improve a store experience. They can sort of adapt and change for location, whether that's a mall format or a high street format. But what we've been thinking in the studio and, hypothesizing and thinking about what the future might be, what are these new formats? How is what's a post-COVID world format look like? And, some of the sort of digital boom that we've experienced in the last, it's been longer. How has that affected the formats that we create in the future? So you got the next one, mate. So then we broke it down into three different formats that we've been exploring. And again, these are hypothetical questions we've really been asking ourselves in the studio as have been feeding into the strategies that we create. So, faster, how can we create faster formats that are not only changing and adapting with this world that is, we need building in that agility. What types of formats are we going to create that move quick and also create a feedback loop to whether it's, changing the products, adapting the products that the brand creates, or actually getting, brand storytelling out to market very quickly. Then smaller, I think if you've not read it, it's definitely worth a read, but the PSFK, store report of like what the future of store looks like. I think, Piers hopefully will give me some commission for reading these out. But, if you're looking at the sort of future of bricks and mortar retail, one of the stats in here, which we thought was really interesting. So 33% of businesses have already gone through the process of closing underperforming stores, which is not, no surprise due to COVID. But nearly as many as the same as that. So 31% plan to significantly reduce the store count. Also, 31% are looking to operate smaller fulfillment centers, and then 27% are planning to operate stores with less square footage. So then this sort of hypothetical store size, this smaller store that we looked at in the middle here, that's really relevant, because if they're going to be smaller, they need to be more purposeful, really need to do a job, have a real focus. So what is that going to be? And then nearer, we know this sort of migration out to new neighborhoods. Everyone's worked from home and, are either missing some of their comforts from whether it's their HQ or whether it's the city they worked in. So how are these neighborhoods going to change? And, what does nearer actually mean for a new concept? So these are the three things we're going to just explore, and hopefully you'll engage in some two-way conversation with us. Some of the stats from last year that we thought was really interesting, Gen Z are still really all about discovery, with this 80% of Gen Z preferring to shop in store. How might that change as we sort of evolve and look to new experiences opening up? Time will tell. Also, I thought this was a really interesting point. So 38% of US respondents and 39% of UK respondents claim that a human-to-human experience is super important when choosing a brand to shop with. And I think one of the points that Rachel made on from Story, who set up Story, she made was this idea of the role of people in store. How the role in people is, whether it's really important, but if we looked at the sort of insight and data and thinking we put behind creating a seamless online experience and a CX experience, if we put that insight and data behind creating these roles of people in store, I think we might, end up with some really interesting types of concepts. And
just
then finally,
Tom, you were saying earlier about like threading in anything just as we go through, but there was a good talk. I don't know whether anyone saw. It was interrupted by some of the tech glitches, but Ron Thurston, who's written a book called Retail Pride, on that point as well, it was quite interesting. He talked about the pyramid that runs from kind of operations to store associates all the way through to like brand experiences. That pyramid is tipping upside down, where he said the store associate is at the very top of the pyramid now, and the power of that human-to-human connection has never been more powerful than it is today, which is really interesting. Yeah,
exactly. And then this idea of immersive experience, we all know pre-COVID, I'm sure everyone was pretty much sick of the word experience. Working in the retail industry, it was the buzzword of the last sort of 5 or 10 years or whatever. But I think it's like, how is that evolving? How is this online experience becoming more human, and how is the offline experience becoming more, data-driven, insight-driven? So I think these were 3 things that we thought was really important to explore. And now I'm going to hand over, I think if you click onto the next page, now I'm going to hand over to H, who's going to take you through the first section, Faster, and then we'll break for some questions on Faster, and then we'll dig into the other sections.
Thanks, Tom. It's me.
Oh, Danny.
I was going to say, I'm a bit more then thinking, oh, maybe we've juggled our sections around, but yeah, it's going to be Danny.
There's a slight lag in the page change, but we're introducing the first format, which is Faster. How fast can we go? And the question we've been asking ourselves is, as change becomes prescient to demand and desire, how does retail respond to create offers that respond and adapt at pace? And really, it's no longer enough to respond to change at the pace of the brand. At YourStudio, we talk a lot about moving at the pace of culture. And that really helps build resilience into your retail experience to ensure that we're not only just keeping up with the consumer, but we're also staying ahead. And a lot of the briefs that we're getting as a business are demanding that we work at pace. And that's really reflective of the challenges that brands are now facing with this ever-shifting and changing crazy world that we are living in. So at the start of July, the Harvard Business Review wrote that the pandemic is rewriting the rules of retail. And I think that the challenges in the sector were, before the onslaught of the pandemic, were real enough, without them being forced to close stores under government guidelines and embrace this new normal. So really, the pandemic has put us all on the back foot. And what we are seeing now is a real rapid reorganization of even the biggest brands and the biggest businesses, those that really want to lead in the market. So brands have to really get up to speed and anticipate. And it takes a lot of research and a real deep understanding of your customer and consumer. And as humans, our values and expectations are shifting, changing the way we shop. We're all seeing this acceleration of online retail and a shift to D2C strategies. But what does this actually mean for physical retail and the role of the store? And we'd like to introduce to you the next generation of pop-up. So the term pop-up, we've been discussing this in the studio. It sounds pretty dated now, maybe almost too informal and too playful. Now we're seeing the rise of what we're calling the live lab, and this one literally means business. So these test sites, ephemeral or not, are there to trial and test innovation and feed insights back into the mothership. And this literally stakes out progress and manifests innovation onto the shop floor. So we've been reading various reports, such as the Independent Retailer, who are saying that pop-up shops generate more than $38 billion per year. But these live labs that we're talking about are of far more value than just the standalone P&L. They are central to the understanding of the future offer of your brand. So rather than seeing these as an offshoot, these really need to be seen as a hub. So whether this is testing an entirely new proposition or doing something as simple and small as tweaking language at the point of sale, these formats are what are going to progress your offer, and consumers are far more willing to take these at face value. So it's less about being a pop-up and temporary and more about having this inbuilt agility and flexibility into these formats. On to the benefits. The benefits are clear. If you keep your core purpose clear as a brand, it allows you to really stretch and expand your brand's proposition. So this format learns from its visitors, and it drives the business with in real life data. It becomes a lab of ideas where brands can test the new and test what's upcoming within the business. It builds brand exclusivity, it actions purpose and bravery. But to get it right, you have to be able to deliver this format through your business. And what can make or break this is decision-making within your organization. How can you actually action purpose and land it on the shop floor at pace? And that doesn't come without its challenges. So on to a quote that we've all been using a lot in the studio. It's about connection and not perfection. So we absolutely love this quote. It's from a musician called Freya Riding, and actually she's talking about performing live at a music concert. But we feel like this really sums up this format perfectly. I think the veil around us has dropped. We are all working from home. It's revealed real people in real settings, presenting in hoodies, collaborating to emerge from this. And really, what we're trying to say that it's okay to still be figuring this out because change is happening so quickly. So even if you're a global brand, everybody's still kind of figuring this one out and really learning along the way. A couple of case studies to show you. So these are two live lab experiential projects that YourStudio created for Pandora, the jewelry brand, as part of their global product launches. And on the left is Pandora Shine. So this was a 3-day activation for the launch of Pandora's first ever gold jewelry range. So this was a giant multi-sensory beehive designed to bring product stories to life through the senses. And although this was clearly a super creative way to launch a product, in the background, we were gleaning data that the brand would then use to keep improving their offer. So we were measuring footfall, dwell times in specific areas and locations, tracking the number of customers that went into store from the activation, looking at the increase in sales in the surrounding areas, looking at the media impressions this drove through the press, and also looking at the social media reach as well. And then the one on the right-hand side, this was a more recent project called the Heartbeat Hub. And this was a 4-day installation to celebrate the launch of Pandora's new brand purpose and identity. And their new purpose was all around giving a voice to things that their customers love. And as part of this experience, the Pandora host actually asked a series of questions to the customers about the things that they loved. And their responses then shaped the experience inside the Heartbeat Hub, which became personalized to that individual. But the data that was gathered from this was used by the brand to actually help shape the future product offer in each particular region where this installation took place. So these installations were all pre-pandemic, and now we're delivering more fast-paced experiences and data-driven experientials than ever before. And really, it's all focused around getting that insight into the customer and having that two-way conversation and dialogue with them, and using that conversation to feed back into the business to improve the product offering, your service offering, and the retail environment itself. And one brand that we've seen doing this at a mass scale is Walmart. I'll play you this video. So there are quite fascinating changes at play within the grocery sector. So Walmart, who are obviously a giant of a business, have opened up 4 sites as test labs. And what they're doing in these test labs is continuously rotating new technology, digital tools, and making physical enhancements in and outside of the store. And they talk a lot about trying to close that gap between the digital and the physical shopper journey. And I have a quote here from the Senior Vice President of Product and Next Generation Stores. And he says, to increase the speed at which we learn, product and technology teams will be embedded into the stores to prototype, test, and iterate solutions in real time, scaling what works and then scrapping what doesn't, creating a true rapid prototype environment. So really, this kind of test and learn site, it has innovation at its core. When it fails fast, but it's continually learning and improving and getting better. And it feeds insights into the business that can be actioned across the whole store estate. So finally, for the faster section, in summary, there's a lot to gain here, but it really falls down to how your business can deliver these. How can you deliver change at pace within your organization? I mean, we've all changed our working practices a lot over the last year, and now the legacy of this looks set to stay. So change will always be a constant that we will need to embed into our retail environments and into our retail experiences. And we've really summed these up as 3 pillars: being bold, uniting teams, which is all about bringing different teams along on the journey to adapt and innovate quickly and make decisions quickly. And then finally, learn and evolve to continually improve the offer.
Just on the right-hand side there, we've got a poll. So if you, the second part to Howard's poll, first question was, about the physical role. What do you guys think, the role will play? We've put three different options down there. H, do you want to talk about them? And then we've got the faster poll as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I can't see the result of the polls. I don't know whether
you've got to answer the question, mate.
Oh, good. Okay, good. That's fun. We're part of this too. So yes, 100%. That's amazing. And the future. Some of these were slightly multiple choicey in a little bit of a crafty way, in that there aren't really any strong fire answers. It's really a spectrum of things. Oh, interesting. So sensory and experience. So if we go through the first 2 questions, 100%, as Tom said, think there's a role for the physical store. If yes, what role do you think the future store will play? A place for lifestyle services, 15%. A place for human connection was 30%. So we're ratcheting up there. And then the best result was for a sensory and experiential space for product storytelling, which is so brilliant, because the first breakfast talk that we're giving this year is all around product storytelling. And if anyone's interested, if they email danny@weareyourstudio.com, we'll put his email address in the chat panel. We will be hosting a breakfast on that exact subject. But as we break at the end of Danny's brilliant section, I wondered if anyone in the audience has any questions or wanted to throw any questions out.
Also got your thoughts poll as well, mate. You've got your...
Yes. Sorry, and then, yeah, you're absolutely right. So we've also got, for each section, we've got a poll. Got carried away there. Faster. What are the most powerful ways we can use test lab stores, which are these new forms of pop-up lab stores that Danny described? Glean vital real-time data to improve products and services, trial new ideas to be able to constantly iterate brand offer, or allow a stronger form of co-creation between brand and consumer. Outright winner at over 50% of the votes was trial new ideas to be able to constantly iterate brand offer. Oh, it's changing as we speak, actually. People are voting again. So yeah, at this point, is there anyone in the audience who'd like to throw an opinion out there, or has any thoughts on the faster section before we go on to smaller? We'll have a Q&A at the end.
I think there's a bit of a, some questions that, or discussion with John and IPEC on the right-hand side there. I think, that idea that when all brands are trying to connect, this becomes overwhelming for the customer. And I think that's, an important thing about being targeted thinking about who is your base consumer, who you're trying to build that connection with, and not going too broad, and really sort of sticking to the loyal fans who sort of stick by you. And I think, Josh, you sort of touch on the, to Howard's point, if we're looking at the top of the chain, this sort of personal interaction, then it is going to be super targeted. The sales associate is going to be not overwhelming. It's going to be very focused. So I think that's a really interesting point, interesting discussion that was going on there.
I think that flows brilliantly into your section, doesn't it? Because actually that idea of how you localize and narrowcast is what you're going to talk through. So let's go to the section number 2.
So,
smaller.
So smaller, to the points, some of the stats that were pulled out a bit earlier, that idea that people are reducing their footprint. So this section, we look at, what is that going to be focused for? What is the purpose of this smaller experience going to be? And how we're going to make it really effective for the business, but also create a connection to the consumer. So if you just flick on to Next one. So this is something we've been hypothesizing, this idea of, moving from click and collect, very functional, very sort of singular experience, and frankly, pretty awful click and collect experiences that I've had over over the lockdown period. That probably hasn't done anything for, in a positive way to some brands' health. And moving to click and connect, this idea that it's a space to connect, really looking at that when people make the effort to come down and pick up from store, which a lot of people are now doing rather than just getting something delivered to home. How is this a real service and experience driven format that can sort of adapt and change to the types of consumers that are coming in to pick things up. I thought there's some really interesting stats around the idea that people are coming, using click and collect more. So 40% of brands, this again is from the PSFK report. So Piers, if you're watching, want some commission, mate, get people buying your report. So 40% of brands offer buy online, pick up in store, or BOPIS as it's called here, versus 25% in 2019. So that's a huge increase. Obviously it's been a necessity, but it is a huge increase nonetheless. And 46% of brands are able to ship from store to a consumer's door now. And I think one of the other interesting stats that we sort of pulled out in lockdown last year. So since April, the click and collect market has surged, according to Adobe, by over 200% in April this year. And in the UK 2022, this market is set to make up 20% of online orders, to be worth 9.6 billion, according to global data. So I think this, and whether it's 20%, I think one of the questions that came out of the talk that we did was, what are the sort of hangovers, or what are the sort of habits that do we think people are going to, take when things start to open up? What do we think people are going to take forward into sort of this new world? And I think it's really interesting to think about that and hypothesize about that, because we feel this is our time. Some of these amazing things that we're able to, the habits that people are sort of forced to do, we can really take them forward by creating engaging and really connecting experiences. So as this sort of next page shows, taking this sort of distribution center, which could be the HQ or it could be the sort of flagship store. These click and connect stores are either support for that, or it's a pickup area, or it becomes, the distribution center becomes the HQ, and then the little click and connect, so they're in the neighborhoods as well, which we'll sort of touch on a little bit later. So if you click on. So we thought this was a really interesting case study. So Box, which is in Finland, which is a part of the postal service out there. This was launched at the beginning of last year, and it actually seems like a absolutely perfect concept for COVID, because you can do amazing things like, it's got an unboxing area, it's got a place where you can do all of recycling, it's got seating, it's got a coffee area, it's got a digital kiosk so you can send your parcels back. It does everything that we've kind of touched on with this idea of this connection space, very service driven, all about building that relationship. And also it doubles up as an event space and, a place you can host, whether it's an event or whatever. So I think it's a really interesting case study that developed just before COVID, but I think we're going to see a lot more of these types of spaces as we come out at the end. And then this, there we go, it's working now. So this was actually, Howard was out presenting this at the beginning of 2020. So we, as part of the role, we work with PSFK to sort of bring some of the insight to life through conceptual thinking. And this was a piece of work we did to look at the supermarket experience of what that might be. And, in hindsight, this was sort of for 2030, we thought, but actually this is so relevant now. And, I feel like this is a concept that could really come to life now. So this is the idea that, the mundane elements of shopping, whether it's your weekly eggs and bread, they're very much the mundane stuff that you get on your weekly shop. As you arrive at store, your shopping list is already written out. So as you arrive with your geolocation, your shop starts to be prepared. So as you're walking around the space, the things that are front, we're moving fulfillment to the back and experience to the front. As you're walking around the space, you're able to experience your meat products, cheese products, your fish products, all of the things that are really important that you choose and that add that layer of experience. And then as you walk around to finish your store experience, either your weekly shop is put into your into the boot of your car, or you go and pick it up at the pickup area. So this is really challenging this idea of, whether it's you have one or the other, it's either shop online and then click and collect, or you have this in-store experience. We really wanted to blend the two. So the mundane things that you're not that bothered about just happen. And then the things that you actually really care about and want to take time and spend time choosing, they're the ones that you really bring to the front. So I think it's a really interesting concept that we put together at the beginning of last year, which now seemed like a bit of a something that could happen now. And then finally, this sort of bookable idea of bookable events. We've seen a lot of people turning their stores into one-to-one experiences where people are able to book and come and experience, whether it's touch the product or come and have a one-to-one style consultation. And I think moving forward, we're going to see that more and more, these sort of more lifestyle service-driven spaces that are going to grow and grow. And then just to summarize, so really embedding experience in everything that we create, whether it's this, sort of this very much smaller format, how are we bringing experience to the front? And then format, I can't actually see what that says. So format support, how are we, supporting the different formats within the estate, how are they working together and helping each other? And then this idea of really making it personal, as Howard says, turning that pyramid upside down. So really focusing the support that, the store associate is becoming the really important person. And that is me on that one. So I think if we go to the polls.
Yeah, drum roll. We need to drum up. If anyone wants to put any last 5-second votes in for the smaller section, our smaller, more narrow class offers a good way to. So the results, do you want to do the results?
Yeah, that's
Tom?
okay, mate. I'll do it. So we've got provide convenience is 12%. Offer stronger personalized experience is pretty much winning with 56%. And building connection between people and brands is 32%. Which is great. And then over to you, H. And again, I think we've got any more questions? No, but if you have any other questions as we go, just please add them in the chat. We promise we won't bring you up if you don't want to come onto the stage. We can just answer them. So over to you, H, onto Nira.
Thanks very much. Exciting times. We've got the last section. We've done faster. We've done smaller. Now we're going nearer, and the idea of what the neighborhood stands for. Just a quick answer to Josh, to Michael's question. The session is being recorded, and apparently PSFK will create a database. So this will be something you can dip into later on if you miss any of the content. And for anyone joining, you can see the talk at the beginning. So going to neighborhoods and nearer, what's been really interesting is the idea of people flocking away from the cities, which we haven't seen in America since the Great Depression, and the rapid acceleration of people looking for calm and tranquility, more space, and access to all sorts of different offers has meant that retail is also in a state of migration and needing to answer these new desires from consumers. If we go on to the next page, Danny. During coronavirus, the power of community was strongly felt. Initiatives that honour localism and community have been appreciated. Small independents and local stores become the cornerstones of our society. We're spending more time in our neighbourhoods, we're spending more time at home, we're reconnecting with our neighbours, and equally we're reconnecting with our shopkeepers. And as retailers, cookie cutter branding, which was the terror of 10 years ago has now translated into the idea of a brand powerhouse that doesn't listen to its audience and nuance and tailor its offer locally. If anyone saw the talk that Tom mentioned by the founder of Story, Rachel Sketchman, it's a very difficult name.
I didn't try and say a second name. I knew I'd say it.
I think it was Schechtman. But this was incredible in terms of getting to know their neighbors. When Story was opening an offer with Macy's in Silver Lake, South Lake in Texas, not only did they spend time there trying to understand the neighborhood, they actually slept with their consumers. And by that, they hired an Airbnb apartment and they hosted a whole series of events to have dinners, to have local panels and focus groups to understand what that environment and area really, really needed and how they could best serve that community. That was before lockdown, and it actually opened, ironically, 2 weeks before lockdown. But what's interesting is the idea of really having an ear to the ground and understanding that what's more important than ever is serving the communities in ways that they need their lives fulfilled and served in richer ways. Then the next slide, a statistic on that while Danny's changing the slide, which is really interesting, is although we saw a lot of people moving away from cities and citing that they wanted to move away from cities, at the beginning of lockdown in America, in the USA, over 40% of people said that they wanted to leave metropolitan locations for somewhere calmer and quieter. But as the year progressed, we've seen those numbers change, and there are a lot less people now saying they do want to move. So the city locations are still important and still have a real purpose. In this diagram here, we see the central city hub. So if we're looking at a physical store, the absolute mecca that people will do a pilgrimage to is most likely to be in a city location. We're not saying that's going to change. What that city location offers will move more and more into emotional, resonant, irreplaceable experiences you couldn't have anywhere else. And the services and the personalization and lifestyle offers will become richer and stronger. And then when we look at the neighborhood formats, it's almost a hub and spoke model where the neighborhoods are all using that phrase. I love this phrase, narrowcasting, but they're very much about a nuanced offer that really serves the neighborhood. And statistically speaking, while we have seen the migration from cities slow down a little bit, even if 1% of the New York population moved out of New York into a city, an area like Minneapolis, that would instantly make up 14% of that city's demographic. So people are talking about the brain drain and the brain gain. And as retailers, if we're looking at new neighborhood locations, we need to be thinking about how we're offering much more culture-fueled, lifestyle-enhanced destinations that feel like a memorable place to have visited rather than something just to fulfill a function. You have to, J'adore, Dior, and the luxury brands this year went into overdrive. It's been cited, 2020 has been cited as a year where the luxury brands launched some of the best pop-ups they'd ever launched. And it's not a territory they're normally launching and familiar with, apart from obviously around Fashion Week, but brands from Dior to Gucci to Loewe all thought about where their consumers were. And while a lot of Europe was on lockdown and people weren't visiting the Mediterranean as much, they started serving the local community. Dior launched a series of pop-ups around the Mediterranean for the locals, with changing rooms, with different facilities. Loewe created a pop-up in Ibiza, the heartland of where many of their collections come from. But the idea of building these collections and taking them out really went against the grain of generally thinking that a city would be the ultimate location for a pop-up. And some great stats around that. We saw pop-ups in locations outside of New York, in the Hamptons, which outperformed New York locations, which was incredible. Melissa Gonzalez from the company Lionesque told Vogue Business that a brand she worked with saw 1/10 of its usual traffic through the whole summer in New York, where it made a whole month's worth of revenue in the first week of its pop-up launch in the Hamptons. So case studies are showing us that there's a great deal of gain to be had by thinking about locations outside of cities. And again, back to Danny and Tom's points in their sections, not just seeing these as isolated locations for retail, but areas to feed back data and live stream information to the heartland of the brands and back to those brand meccas. So the learning from what we've seen in the last year will accelerate and form a network of hyper-fueled retail connected stores across neighborhoods and city locations. And then a lovely quote there, going where people are already is ultimately better for brands because it means that foot traffic is not entirely dependent on them. Their storefronts will exist in an ecosystem along with restaurants, workout studios, and cultural spots. If anyone reads the Robin report, there was a really good article this morning all around the idea of mall locations. We've seen Macy's define their top performing malls as an area to focus on along with smaller format stores. And the article by Pam Danziger talked about the migration of malls to areas where the offers become much more tailored and the blend needs to go way beyond the idea of just going to a mall to shop and have something to eat, but how that mall actually really fulfills greater purpose for you and becomes a destination that's unavoidable. So broadening out what you're doing as a brand in the mall locations in the future will be really pertinent. On the next slide, really, really clever. Talking about coffee shops, every brand started thinking about putting a coffee shop inside their store 5 years ago. We're now seeing coffee shops like Starbucks put workspace into their coffee shops. There's a whole generation of migrant workers now who are moving around. They're not tethered to a company headquarters. And whether we'll see the company headquarters return as we know it, we're yet to find out. So brands like Starbucks in Tokyo have created this incredible third space for workers where you can book a spot to work quietly. You can book a conference room where you can do video facilities and presentations on screens. And there's meditation areas. So facilitating work when the absence of the workplace means there's a gap to fill is a really interesting form of innovation that a brand like Starbucks has taken on brilliantly. Unfortunately, not coming to America, but a really, really great proposition. So the summary for NERA is there are challenges in serving your neighborhood, and as brands with big voices and big personalities, a lot of our international brands that we're familiar with have had to really think about how they disseminate those big brand voices into much more local dialects. So the three big prongs of attack that we think are really important are travel to where your consumers are, and also preempt the traveling around and maybe back into cities. So it's not just traveling there independently, but thinking about how that journey travels with your consumers. Never have brands been closer to consumers than they are now. Understanding neighborhood needs. So the nuances of the traditional shopkeeper need to be principles that you embody in your approach as larger, bigger organizations, and understand how you can serve your local community and how that will change from area to area. And then nourish and nurture your local tribe. So the idea of building your congregation is not just around these big brand mecca sites, but now the local dissemination of your brand is a brilliant way to build connections, have that upside down pyramid element of really, really strong human connections, and then use those as powerhouses back to the whole network so that we are all happy and connected and feeling like the brands are really listening to us and co-creating and doing all sorts of things with us that feel relevant. So we have a poll, the last poll of the session.
Loving these polls. I'm loving how everyone's.
We should do this poll because we've done one poll each so far.
I can only just see the poll. Sorry, I've been in the presentation, so I couldn't see
anything. Oh, sorry. If you go to the polls section at the very bottom and you scroll down, you'll see the NERA. Do you feel local neighborhood stores can? And then there are the results there if you answer the poll.
So the poll, do you feel local neighborhood stores can broaden reach to the consumers, glean feedback to localize and nuance offers, or provide convenience and build brand credibility? So the outstanding winner is the provide convenience and build brand credibility, which is 53%. And then the glean feedback to localize and nuance offers is on 28%. And then the broaden the reach is on 18%, but it is changing as we speak.
Josh has called it. We've got a poll, drum roll. I thought, as you know, we've got some interesting comments in the side here. One from Joe about the sort of Trader Joe's space. Did it have a non-specific, flexible space in it? I think retail and building in that agility is essential for any successful space. You know, whatever we create, it always has to have that idea of that flex in it and something non-specific in it. So, you know, whether it's a product launch or a new brand story you want to tell, or a new product story you want to tell, I think that's absolutely key with every concept that we create. And also, IPEC, there's a question. So the click and connect, interesting as a terminology. How does it work for a mall? I think, you know, again, it's like a mall is almost becoming a, you know, it facilitates that connection into the community. I think malls are going to really change. They're becoming in themselves, you know, fulfillment centers. So I think it's like, how do you divide, you know, if you look at a mall, how do you bring, we actually did a concept for PSFK in the same report, which was how do you bring, on a bigger scale, bring experience to the front and fulfillment to the, you know, the mall actually owns the fulfillment. So it's almost like you move your back of house, the mall looks after that, and then you bring all of your, you know, product storytelling to the front. So I think that, you know, again, is another really interesting topic to explore. Daniel, I think you're being very selfish, mate. No, Daniel said, I don't mean to be.
I love it.
Daniel says, I don't mean to be selfish. What about scent and scent logos? You know, scent's super important. I actually have no sense of smell, so I really don't care. But you know, sense and sound is to build a real 360 sensory experience. All of it needs to be, you know, working in harmony to create that right environment.
I was just going to say, there's two things. One, Trisha's question, but just to build on that as well, we did a talk earlier in the year about the senses and touch, play, and experience, and just the idea of, in the absence of so much touch, we started to see a lot of brands using this concept of visual tactility. So going into a store environment, what can you do to create that sense of tactility? And scent was a really important part of that. And then the visual environment that you're in really giving you food for the eyes, so that you feel like you might not necessarily be able to kind of interact and play with all the samples like you did before, but maybe through playing and understanding the textures there. I was going to read Trisha's question because I've got a good answer, or I've got a relevant answer that I think she might like, because we know Trisha is an absolute complete foodie as well as a world-class expert in retail. But Trisha's question is, we've chatted about brands going into neighborhoods. With the behaviors that have developed from our pandemic experiences, deliveries and brands going to consumers' home looks even more relevant. I'm thinking of the days when we relied on milk deliveries and ice cream trucks that drove by. Are you seeing some good examples of this starting to happen beyond just grassroots? Well, it's an interesting one. There are lots of brands that are looking at the idea of delivery and connection, and even the idea of tracking your order becoming experiential. So in a similar way to the milk flow, the idea that if you're ordering your goods, and especially anything related to food and beverage, the tracking and the arrival experience becomes something through technology that's really enhanced. But something that I read about this week that I found really interesting, and it is still very grassroots, but a number of restaurants have obviously fulfilled people's need to do make out and kind of make their food at home, or have really swanky home deliveries of food. But a restaurant near us in Shoreditch called Lyle's has started completely switching their business. They're really, really lovely pantry style fine dining, but they've been doing really well with their make-out business, and they've actually created a whole new offer called the larder. So they're almost becoming like a kind of foodie supermarket, and they're delivering nationally now through a partner that they've got together with. So the idea of the larder and the provisions that you might get from fine dining going really, really national and out of the sort of hotspots that you might find in London or Manchester or Birmingham. For the UK, it's really interesting how that will translate for brands outside of the food and drink sector.
There's a really interesting one in Amsterdam as well, actually. There was a big drop during the pandemic, a big drop in footfall in the local food market. So a startup actually created an app called Local Heroes, which was heroing all the owners of the market stalls and it was essentially like an Uber Eats for all the food markets around Amsterdam. So from your own home, if you couldn't actually go out to the market because of the pandemic, you could actually order all of the market produce from several different stores at once, and it would be delivered to your home within an hour, which is pretty impressive.
Well, also, there's the Burberry Pop-Up van. I think it was the Burberry Pop-Up van that did it, where they basically created a changing room on wheels. So they, for specialist consumers, you know, the high net worth, they drove out to meet them as a sort of like a movable pop-up, where you're able to try the latest products. I'll send you a link to it, Trisha, because you'll love it. On the outside, the van looks quite simple, but on the inside, it's all plush wood and done out like a really amazing changing room. Also, a project that we're working on with a large drinks brand is, you know, when people order food and drinks from something like Deliveroo, they don't get any brand benefit from the delivery experience. So we're working with this drinks brand on, okay, if we're going to do like a horse and cart delivery of some special product, you know, what might that look like? You know, how might we get some tangible brand benefit by them doing a drop off? So what story might we tell, and how might we link it to the product we're delivering? So I think it's a really interesting topic. I think, you know, this idea of, at the minute, we're not getting any benefit by, you know, Amazon delivering it for us, or apart from the financial benefit. I think then people are going to start to think, okay, how can we get a brand benefit from this, and how can we create human connection?
I think Kate makes a good point as well. I don't know whether we actually mentioned it in the talk, but the three formats are not mutually exclusive from each other. They are not meant to be kind of delivered in silos from each other. They all kind of cross-pollinate and inform each other. So yeah, that's a valid point.
What other questions have we got? How are we doing for time? We're nearly...
Got a few more minutes. So did we, Brittany, in a social justice setting, have you found brands are open to providing services and store formats that will help marginalized communities without needing a guaranteed ROI?
I think the idea of, I mean, I don't have a direct answer with some distinct pop-up that brands done, but we're tracking a lot of brands in the UK, Europe and overseas that are working to do good and to do the best that they possibly can. There's a few brands that we tracked. There's a hotel brand in London that was using its location to serve communities that don't normally get considered for work experience. So people that had really difficult times with their education, or even with criminal records for things that were unavoidable incidents in their life, but kind of giving them a new roadmap through the hotel and training them up to work there, and then like growing and having charity. The people that stayed in the hotel, part of the funding from their hotel stay was going towards a charity that was serving that community and helping people get a foot up. And then in some of the supermarkets, we're working with Co-op in the UK, which is a really, really, really brilliant supermarket that has, yes, been doing lots and lots of initiatives that don't necessarily get fueled by an ROI, but the idea of the tension that we've seen in a really difficult year, not only food banks, but the idea of like crime and violence. So they've done things like an amnesty and then given money towards children's services and building children's playgrounds and resources. So it's a really, really important question. And the idea of just serving rich white neighborhoods, I think, although we did talk about the luxury sector, it is just one strand of a much, much more complex web of initiatives that we're tracking. And those luxury retail brands obviously play to a certain type of audience and to their kind of the target that they're focusing in on. But yeah, a lot of the brands we're working on have been doing some incredible things since lockdown and since COVID.
I think we're pretty much done for time now. So thank you, everybody, for your questions. I've just popped into the chat. If anybody wants to see an exec summary of the presentation, then just email me at danny@weareyourstudio.com, and I can share that with you. And if anybody's got any further questions or wants to discuss anything around these subjects, then feel free to drop us an email. We can jump on a Zoom in the near future. But it's been great to chat to you all.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.